Hello, Ana Paula, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Ambassador. Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you once again.
Perfect. Lovely to see you. I'll take myself off the screen now. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to check my
no
sound
problem.
working.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, hello. Welcome to this webinar organized by the British Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Brazil. I am Ana Paula Vitelli, President at the Chamber, and we'll be using this first few minutes for introducing the Chamber and thanking our participants and our speakers, and of course to those who have organized this session. So thank you for joining us this morning. It is a pleasure to have you all here with us. Britcham mission is to be the reference of the UK-Brazil business community, providing relevant forums to foster bilateral trade, investment services, and relationships among its members, companies, and executives. We are located in different parts of Brazil with offices in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Paraná, and Minas Gerais. And being part of the Chamber, being a member at the Chamber, means to engage and network with companies and decision-maker professionals, executives in Brazil and in the UK. I would like to thank first to Britcham supporting members whose brands have been widely publicized in the opening slide of this webinar. I also would like to thank to Carolina Ures, President of Britcham in São Paulo, to Bianca Antacli, who's the President of Britcham's Environment and Sustainability Committee, and also to Guilherme Leal, who is the Vice President of Britcham's Environment and Sustainability Committee, and will also be moderating this session today. Thank you very much for all of you who have organized this very important session event. And of course, thank you to Britcham team who's on the backstage operating this session. And of course, I'd like to thank our speakers this morning for first accepting our invitation to bring such a relevant content to our audience. So first, Ambassador Peter Wilson, thank you for joining us this morning. Mrs. Izabella Teixeira, co-chair of the UN International Panel on Natural Resources and former Minister of the Environment from 2010 to 2016. Thank you very much for joining us. And then Mr. John Murton, UK's COP26 Envoy. Thank you all very much for your availability of joining us this morning. And I wish you all a great session. I pass this on now to Carolina Ures. Carolina, it's now with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you so much for being here. We know that this is a very important event for us. This is the first event of a long series along the year in which we want to promote the topic and the discussions of sustainability, which are very important. And we were discussing a little bit before the start of this event, how important it is, the participation of the private sector in these discussions for us to push the advances that we need, not only in Brazil, but in the world. So thank you, Ana, for being here. I know you have a really busy schedule, but it's important that you're here now. We are grateful for that. We wanted to also thank the supporting members, as Ana mentioned, Bianca and Guilherme, who have been done a wonderful job organizing these events. They have been doing and planning a lot for the past months, actually almost 6 months organizing these events. I'm also very grateful for Ambassador Peter Wilson and Minister Izabella Teixeira and UK's COP envoy, COP26 envoy John Murton, for being here and for sharing, as the ambassador said, straight from the center of the discussions, your knowledge and your expertise in how to guide the private sector into moving this agenda forward. I'm going to explain a little bit about the webinar dynamics. Today's webinar is streamed live through Zoom and also on the YouTube channel, Britcham's YouTube channel. The video will remain available for the ones that have to leave for any reason after the webinar. They're going to be uploaded in our channel as usual, so you're going to have access to it. We also have the speakers' presentations followed by a Q&A. The Q&A is exclusive for Britcham members through the Q&A tool at the Zoom platform. The questions on YouTube, unfortunately, have to be disregarded because we don't have time, and hopefully we're going to have a very exciting discussion during this morning. Please, when you pose your questions on the Q&A, do not forget to mention your name and the company you're representing for us to be able to follow up later if anything is needed. And the questions we'll probably have to curate because there are a lot of them. We already received some of them, so we're going to have to make a curation of the questions and filter the ones that are the most relevant, but all of them will be answered eventually, okay? So, of course, we have Britcham's committees. We have 9 committees and discussion groups for several fronts and opportunities as displayed in the beginning of the webinar, and they're also available if you want to consult the Britcham's website. Please feel free to share this discussion with as many people as you can so we can share the knowledge of these incredible speakers. Guilherme, I pass on to you the floor.
Thank you, Ana Paula and Carolina. Our Environment Sustainability Committee is delighted to organize this webinar, and not only because of the importance of the subject we are addressing, the COP26, which will take place in Glasgow in November, but more importantly, because of the prestigious speakers we have managed to bring together. So it is really a great honor to introduce Ambassador Peter Wilson, who was appointed to the position of British Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Brazil very recently. We also have John Murton, the UK's COP26 envoy, and Izabella Teixeira, former Minister of Brazil between 2010 and 2016. During this time, in 2015, she was one of the main leaders of the Paris Agreement's negotiation, for which she deserves all our appreciation and gratitude. The list of accomplishments and positions of our speakers just goes on and on. So we are really thrilled to have such a prominent group of panelists with us today. But moving forward, I should now hand the floor to Ambassador Wilson, who kindly accepted our invitation to open our debate. And last Wednesday, one day before the Leaders Summit on Climate hosted by the US, he and Mr. Todd Chapman, an American ambassador to Brazil, published an article in O Globo newspaper stating that United Kingdom is a natural partner of Brazil. Ambassador, how can COP26 strengthen this partnership?
Thank you so much, Guilherme, and thank you very much to the Chamber for organising this event. I do just want to pay tribute to the work that the Chamber is doing in this area, as in so many others, where not only are you sending a very important message about the opportunities for British business on climate, and also how good we are at it, by the way, but also advocating ambition from Brazil, because we genuinely think that this is an opportunity as well as a necessity. I just want to say a couple of things, because I really want to give the Chamber the benefit of hearing directly from Minister Teixeira. And Minister, it's an honour to share a panel with you, and also from our very own John Murton, who is absolutely right at the centre of this debate globally. John and I are old friends and colleagues, and I want you to have the benefit of really hearing from John both about how the UK has reacted to the recent pledges that Brazil has made at the Biden summit, but also how we are planning to run an ambitious COP running up to November. And he's far better placed to do that than I am. I just wanted to focus on a couple of things, really. And one was about how we react to the president's announcements last week, because I think this is a shift and I wanted to pay attention to that. The minister may disagree with me about that, but I wanted to put that out there. And the second was about what we do now. So firstly, to say that I think that the letter that President Bolsonaro chose to write in advance of the summit and the commitments that he made in his speech at the summit shift this debate in Brazil from one where, frankly, the rest of the world was saying, Brazil, you've got to do more, you haven't committed, you're not doing enough, to, okay, now you've brought forward your NDC target to 2050. You've set an ambitious target on illegal deforestation for 2030. You've said that you want to engage with NGOs to take this debate forward, and you are determined to do more. You said you're determined to do more about fiscalisation. So the debate shifts to not will you promise more, but will you now implement what you've promised? I also think diplomatically, but again, Minister, tell me if you disagree with this, because it's always a delicate one, this. But I think diplomatically, we do need to recognize when Brazil says something good. And I think the president said something good last week. Doesn't mean that we're just going to take it all on trust, because, you know, it is also true that the budget of the Environment Ministry has been cut by 24%. It is also true that IBAMA is weaker than it was. And it is also true that a lot of people in the Amazon are saying, please do more. But I think it's fair to say this is about the people of the Amazon as well as about the trees. And I think we sometimes in Europe get that message a little bit wrong. I think it is fair to say we have an obligation on the finance. We recognize that as COP president, but I also want to be realistic about it. And this comes to the second point. It's about what we do now. For me, a key part of all of this is creating a carbon market and a global price for carbon that Brazil will benefit from hugely. I don't think this is about sort of, if you like, transfers of overseas development assistance as much as about creating a market mechanism that will guarantee a decent price for carbon and value the Amazon in a proper way. But I think that also relies on countries providing carbon credits that are high quality and providing a domestic environment that makes them competitive in an international market. And I think getting that message across in the next phase is going to be absolutely critical. I think the other thing is, this is not all about governments. I think sometimes Brazil feels very attacked, or this government in Brazil feels very attacked by the international community. This is not the British government saying, we want this, we want that. It's our consumers saying, we won't buy products that we can't guarantee where they come from. It's about investors saying, we don't want to invest in places that don't take environmental protection seriously. And it's about attitudes, including from central banks and including from Brazil's own central bank, having a very, very different understanding of risk. So climate risk is now being priced into the market in a way that it simply hasn't been before. And final thing for me is just a little bit of modesty. I mean, all of this for us is also quite new. So the transformation that we are trying to make in our own economy, we're definitely doing it for our own benefit. That is fundamental. John will continue far more about this, but it involves some really big decisions for us. We do think in the long term we will economically benefit from this, as well as benefit as a society and as a global contributor. But I don't want to exaggerate, you know, how long it's taken us to get to this point. And John's been fighting this battle for a very long time in lots of different jobs that he's done. But he's moved from being a voice in the wilderness to being absolutely central to what we think about ourselves and how we want to present ourselves to the world. And my feeling is Brazil undersells itself in that respect, because on a lot of things, on sustainable agriculture, on different ways of using fuel, on hydroelectricity, Brazil's got a story to tell the world, which is far more positive than the message the world has been getting until last week from Brazil. So I think there is a massive future opportunity out there, including for business. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wilson. I now hand the floor to John Murton, who has recently met Governor of São Paulo to learn more about the state's effort to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. Could you share some of your thoughts of Brazil's role at the COP26, building on what Ambassador Wilson said about the positive messages that Brazil has delivered last week, and in the context, and maybe explore in the context of this international summit like COP26, what is the role of subnational governments and private companies?
Thanks ever so much. Perhaps if you permit me, I can just start off by because I never quite know, especially with remote travel, the nature of the audience and exactly the levels of knowledge. I could just say a little bit about what we're trying to achieve in COP26 first, in order to put that into context. So with your permission, COP26 is the global environment conference that we'll be hosting in November this year in the UK. It's going to be the largest conference that we've ever hosted in the UK, and the most important international meeting on climate change in the last 6 years, since Paris in 2015. It's going to be a very different meeting than Paris. Paris was about getting 197 member states of the UNFCCC to agree a framework arrangement, a framework agreement for tackling climate change that involved every country on Earth. We don't have to do that in Glasgow, but what we do have to do is demonstrate that the framework agreement that was signed in Paris is one that can work, and is one that is sufficiently strong to deliver on its goals, because its goals are ambitious, to limit the anthropogenic climate change to no more than 2 degrees centigrade and as close to 1.5 degrees C as possible. But the Paris Agreement is as yet unproven as to whether the voluntary mechanisms, the nationally determined contributions that your president in Brazil just announced last week, and the long-term targets your president announced last week, will be strong enough to deliver on those goals. So that's our task at Glasgow, to demonstrate that the Paris Agreement can work and deliver on its goals. In that sense, we have to demonstrate success, progress in 4 areas. The first is progress on mitigation, or reducing emissions. We need to show that the goal of 1.5 degrees C is in reach. And that means demonstrating how, as a global community, we can reduce our emissions to reduce the emissions gap between where emissions are at the moment and the warming trajectory we're on at the moment, and where we need to be to maintain our warming trajectory to as close to 1.5 degrees C as possible. And that means as many countries as possible coming out with just the sort of net zero target, dated net zero target that President Bolsonaro came out with last week. And equally importantly, as many countries as possible, not only setting long-term targets, but setting much shorter-term 2030 goals for how they're going to reduce their emissions over the next 8, 9, 10 years, and should demonstrate that we're actually going to keep ourselves on a pathway that 1.5 degrees C remains possible. And it also means that we'll need to demonstrate at Glasgow that we've reached agreement on some of the remaining elements of the Paris rulebook, like Article 6 and so on, that will enable countries to deliver on their emissions reductions targets. The second goal we need to demonstrate progress on is that of helping countries, helping communities to adapt and become more resilient in the face of climate change. The science is clear. We've already seen more than 1 degree C of anthropogenic global warming already. And that is affecting some of the most vulnerable communities around the world through things like sea level rise, more regular extreme weather events, and increased geographical scope of diseases like malaria as their range increases. And we need to help the most vulnerable communities to adapt to that climate change and be more resilient in the face of it. And if you doubt that anthropogenic climate change is already happening, look at things like insurance rates against extreme weather events. They're already going up. Markets are already pricing it in. So we will need to raise more finance to help global communities to adapt to climate change. And we will need to accelerate actions such as establishing early warning systems and resilient infrastructures and adaptable agriculture to avoid the loss of lives and livelihoods. The third goal we need to demonstrate progress on is finance. We need to show that countries like the UK, donor countries like the UK, can make good on the $100 billion a year of climate finance that we promised in Copenhagen and then again in Paris. And we need to use that public finance to mobilize and unleash not just the billions, but the trillions of private sector investment that are going to be required in order to help us make the transition to a low carbon economy and to build resilience in all our infrastructures. We need to make sure that every financial decision in the world, whether that's you as chief financial officers in your companies, or whether it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer in London, takes climate change into account in their decision making. And that's why, for example, in the UK, we've made it mandatory that by 2023, every listed company in the UK will have to make disclosures in line with the TCFD principles, the Task Force on Carbon-Related Financial Disclosures, to explain the effect of their businesses upon the environment, to give investors the information they need to make asset allocations. And then finally, the fourth goal we need to make progress on is that of enhanced international collaboration. One of the things we've seen very clearly over the last year with COVID is that actually to tackle global problems, we need global collaboration. And that involves successful negotiations at Glasgow to finish the elements of the rulebook that I mentioned, but it also means smaller groups of countries sometimes working together to accelerate some of the transitions that we need to make towards the low carbon economy. For example, in power, countries working together to solve some of the problems in switching to more variable production of that renewable energy entails. On road transport, for example, countries working together to establish common standards for zero emission vehicles to enable manufacturers to speed the transition to making zero emission vehicles and to bring their costs down. Or in land use, where we've established the forestry and commodity trades dialogue with countries like Indonesia and Brazil in order to understand how we can make sure that consumers' choices in emerged industrialized economies don't undermine land use in some emerging economies and forest states. So we need to make progress against those four goals. I'll be really happy to talk a little bit more about that. One of the things we're really clear on as the UK, and Peter referred to this, is we know that as presidency of the UNFCCC this year, we need to practice what we preach. The UK was the first country in the world to set into law, the first major industrialized economy to set into law a net zero target, which we've set for 2050. We have committed through our nationally determined contribution in December last year to reduce our emissions by 68% on 1990 levels by 2030. And last week, our Prime Minister announced that we would put into law our sixth carbon budget, which is the carbon budget. That's the legal framework by which we regulate to bring down emissions, so that by 2035, our emissions will be 78% below 1990 levels. And that's a well-beating level of ambition. And we're making sure that everything we do internationally, and our recent integrated review of our foreign and security policy indicated that climate change was our #1 international priority for 2021 and beyond, that what we do internationally is consistent with what we do domestically. There's no point us investing in bringing down emissions at home if we're spending money increasing them overseas. So we've made sure that embassies, our embassies around the world, and our export credits and our international development finance is all consistent with our climate change objectives and will not go towards supporting fossil fuels. So we're practicing what we're preaching. And I'm really optimistic that the wind is behind us in terms of getting towards a successful outcome at COP26. Almost 50% of the world's economy has now committed to an NDC that is compatible with a 1.5 degrees C trajectory. Almost 70% of the world economy, including now Brazil, have committed to a net zero target of 2050 or 2060. And what we've seen very clearly in our own experience in the UK is that those clear targets, net zero targets, help to drive investment in the low carbon economy. Investment in the low carbon economy drives economies of scale and technical improvements, which reduces costs, and reduced costs means increased uptake. And many of you would have seen Bloomberg Energy's research that 90% of capacity additions to the electricity grid around the world last year were in wind and solar energy. So that the revolution is really taking off. And now increasingly, markets are getting wind of this, and 40% of global assets under management are now committed to net zero 2050 and to science-based targets that align their portfolios with a 1.5 degrees C trajectory, all of which means it's going to be easier to raise funds and capital for renewable and low carbon investments, and harder to raise funds and access finance for fossil fuels. We've seen carbon prices bottoming out in Europe, and we've seen Canada, for example, just make recent commitments to essentially set a floor to carbon prices of over 170 Canadian dollars into the next decade. So I'm really confident the wind is behind us, and what the world is seeing and what markets are pricing in. Tesla is now worth more than Toyota. Exxon has been dethroned as the world's most valuable energy company by a Florida-based renewable energy producer. What we're seeing is markets are pricing in the future, and working out that the growth in the economy in the future is to be found in low carbon, and that as investment piles in, we will have that wind behind us to help us make that transition to a low carbon economy and keep those goals in sight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to ask Izabella Teixeira, based on what Ambassador Wilson and John Murton explained about the opportunities that COP may provide to developing countries and especially to Brazil. Could you comment on the opportunities, if duly embraced, that COP may provide to Brazil?
Okay, good morning from Brazil. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. Mr. John Murton, I'm very happy to meet you, and also the ambassador, welcome to Brazil, and I hope that you enjoy to work here, not only to work hard, but to be closer to Brazilians. I was here carefully listening to you and trying to understand better how to answer your question, Guilherme, and to make clear our challenges today. We cannot discuss Brazil without discussing Amazonia, of course, but also without discussing what is happening today internationally, and what would be the context or the environment that Brazil will have to face post COP26. So we have to know how to come to COP26, but indeed how we put in practice our ambition and everything that was mentioned here after the conference, and consider the crucial decade from 2020 to 2030, because we need to put in practice our vision, our understanding, and how indeed we manage our opportunities, as you mentioned, Guilherme, considering under the climate change umbrella. And we cannot forget that climate, it's an issue that will orient the economy in the world, but also we need to understand that Brazil should make clear what are our national interests, to understand better what the role that we can play on consider climate agenda, the global climate agenda. It's not clear today for us in Brazilian society how Brazil will move, my dear ambassador, from the political intention of 2050 ambition. It's good, it's really good news because we have intention, but not necessarily have clearly the strategies and the different tracks that under how Brazil will combine things, and also how Brazil will face our trade-offs to be more efficient and faster, considering these opportunities that climate change brings to us. It's the first point. We need to understand how Brazil will manage these issues, and more than this, how consider our national inequalities, regional ones, subnational players, everyone that today is on board, how indeed we bring Brazil together post COP26. And this is a big political challenge. Why I mention this? Because if, as Mr. Murton mentioned, international cooperation is very important as one of the 4 issues that you pointed as key, but we need to understand what Brazil wants of international cooperation regionally and also globally. And this means that, in my opinion, we need to understand how to frame our national problems and the global problems, consider post-COVID crisis and post-COP26. This is the environment that we need that we will face in 2022. And for some developing countries, consider COVID crisis, we are really, unfortunately, Brazil also, we are driving very badly COVID crisis. And this means that COVID crisis showed to us in the world, but mainly in these developing countries, how inequalities were exacerbated in pandemic crisis. And inequality, social inequalities, will play an important role to drive to be more efficient in our climate ambition or not. This is really something that we need to observe or to understand better, the challenges that we have in our country to understand how inequalities will play as a barrier for developing economies, to consider our economic recovery, and how indeed low carbon economy or green recovery or multicolor economy recovery, if you can use this expression, because we have not only green, we have blue, we have purple, we have different economies coming to address solutions in this 21st century, and how indeed we will bring this together in a country based on climate-oriented economy growth. And for this, in my opinion, I do believe that some governments are not prepared, as COVID crisis make clear today, to face global problems and also to bring international cooperation in new perspectives. And I will illustrate this, my dear Murton. If you go into international cooperation today, and you know that middle-income countries, they are not exposed, so not under the umbrella of the traditional way of some international cooperation modalities. It's Brazil and all the Amazon countries, they are middle-income countries, okay? But when you go into Amazon regions in these countries, they are low-income countries. And this is the asymmetry that we have from the past and consider the challenge of the future. And you need to understand how and why this is important, because climate crisis exposed this, exacerbate this, and makes clear that we need to understand better how we promote the international dialogue, how indeed we bring this international dialogue, consider the new problems that's coming into the floor, consider developing economies. And this is very important to observe, because climate change must be seen, as you mentioned, and also the ambassador, as an opportunity, critical opportunity for a country like Brazil. Opportunity for economic growth, opportunity for social development and human development, opportunity for environmental protection, but indeed, how we can manage this as part of our ambition, or our vision, of our perspectives for the next decade, and also, as you mentioned, how Brazil, what will be the choice that Brazil must adopt to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. In my personal opinion, you have alternatives. This is a good news. This is really good news. Brazil has really alternatives, and we need to discuss in our society and with our international friends and players, how indeed we could address our priorities, how indeed we could understand better, reframe our problems, national problems, and understand how climate agenda will bring solutions to Brazil in the next decade, but also how it's important to raise net zero ambition. Probably in some sectors in Brazil, if you be really strategic, probably you can achieve this earlier than 2050. But we need ambition, we need vision, we need a strategic approach. And unfortunately, you don't have this very clearly in Brazil today, as we used to have in the past. Okay, in the past, you have the step-by-step process, and our Brazilian NDC expressed this very well, because it was built together with the Brazilian society, private sector, politicians, different trends of political players, etc., and together with the Minister of Economy. Why this is very important? Because that's why you took the decision to have an INDC-based economy-wide approach. And this is why we took this decision, because it was absolutely imperative for our development that we consider climate change as an asset, climate change agenda as an asset for our economic development and social development. So unfortunately, you don't have these measures clearly expressed. You have, as I mentioned before, and it's a good sign. I like to, a good sign here to highlight this, that you have a new direction that the President Bolsonaro expressed the last week. But let me ask about what Brazil indeed in the past had, like climate diplomacy, like climate change as a political, as an expression, a key expression, climate change and sustainability, a key expression of a soft power of Brazil foreign policies and also Brazil image. And absolutely important, how Brazil managed in the past to understand better our trade-offs, our regional inequalities, and how to bring private sector on board, okay? And what we have today, I'm not saying here that's not happening, but we don't have transparency. Or you have some bias, for example, some sectors that are looking forward to address carbon market, for example, in Brazil, and very interested. But you have also private sector, for example, from CBEDs, from the World Economic Sustainable Development Commission in Brazil, saying that we need more ambition. So my feeling is that you don't have all the robust links and connections, political and economic ones, that we need as a country to be back as a leader. Okay, and also to play together internationally with the British and other players to make sense how emerging economies will play closer and closer to go faster in net zero ambition. We did this in the past. Basic group played strategically, Brazil, South Africa, China, and India, we played together to reach Paris Agreement. So you also have bilateral strategy in Brazil together with the United States, with China and Germany and Norway. We signed bilateral agreements, Brazil and these countries, designing or framing our ambition, consider our bilateral interests to have this clearly defined or established in Paris Agreement. And I also consider the social agenda, what Brazil was doing to face poverty, to eliminate poverty and hunger, the outcomes that we have, not only the reduction of deforestation in Amazonia. So today, in my perspective, we have some critical challenges to understand better this picture that you have today in our country. We have a fog over Brazil, and this is based on it's based on because you have Amazon deforestation back, okay? And you need to stop this. We know how to do this. This is impressive. I cannot understand, of course, that we have difficulties because we are facing climate, we are facing environmental crime and also organized crime. It's not easy, I can say, okay? But we have some connections, and I cannot mention this here, but of course, but Brazil knows how to do this. I don't understand the last 2 years mistakes that Brazil went into. It's not, doesn't make sense. Okay, and let's see, and I will make clear, it's not only to say that we will review the budget of IBAMA and the Instituto Chico Mendes. It's more than this. It's not only these institutions that are in charge, that were in charge in the past, to work together with us to tackle deforestation in Amazon region. And you cannot forget that Brazil used to play together with Amazon countries. That's why the leadership, be back as a leader in Amazon regions, not in Brazil, but with pan-Amazon countries is absolutely critical. And Amazon Fund was part of this strategy. So we need to reconnect. We need to understand better how we can go against deforestation. And the National Congress, this is something new. Yesterday, you have a bill from the National Congress for the Senator Caixa Abreu, saying, reviewing the national policy, Brazil national climate change policy, adding that the end of deforestation should happen until 2025, and also manage the goal, the target for 2030. It's very important. The review, the proposal also reviews the mistakes of the NDC, Brazil NDC's updated that was presented last December, and it has really misunderstanding about numbers and also ambition and also diplomat, how can I say, diplomat interest. So my last comment here, because I think that to have this debate, you mentioned about subnational players, and it's very important that you can bring this subnational together, but you need a climate governance. We need a federative articulation. We need to know more in the huge country like Brazil. It's not only Amazonia, but all the other governors of Amazonia, how indeed, what's the role that they can be in charge, and more than this, what is the ambition, how we can use or make clear that climate change, consider the resilience, as mentioned in mitigation, and also adaptation, etc., how indeed we can go into this agenda with this play. It's not clear, okay? And again, I do believe that you can do this, but you need leadership, and for leadership, we need credibility, and for credibility, you need transparency. For transparency, you need democracy. So, and you need institutions. So my feeling is that to have an important momentum today from post-Biden summit to Glasgow conference to try to mobilize Brazilian society. And this is my, if you allow me, Guilherme, and it's a good challenge for British Chamber to try to bring together other chambers, 9 American chambers, Germany, other companies that are looking for, that have robust bilateral cooperation in Brazil, to understand better what are the interests that come together, for example, for carbon market. This is very important. If you are able to discuss the criteria, the parameters, how you want this in our country, I'm sure that Brazil will not going to UK to discuss the loopholes of Article 6, but indeed how Brazil wants to approve or to recommend it or to negotiate Article 6. Why? Because we were one of the key countries that promoted Article 6 during Paris Agreement negotiations. I think that it's also very important to say something about the Brazilian society, not only the NGOs, but as you mentioned, John Murton, you have different initiatives here in Brazil. Okay, they are very, very important because of this maturity, the political and economic maturity of Brazilian society to understand better the challenge on climate change. And it's very important that you can express in Glasgow the vision, the forecasts of a Brazil, of a low carbon Brazil. That's why I said that to have a fog over Brazil. We are still in the past, and we need to tell new stories based on the future in Brazil. And so we need to tackle deforestation, but we need to show to the world that Brazil low carbon, and the possibilities, and what is happening today in agriculture. We have agriculture, low carbon agriculture, we have nature positive agriculture, you have energy, our energy mix, the scenarios to be more ambitious in our energy mix, also our cities. When you go into Amazonia, it's not only the stand-up forest, the Amazonia 2030, you have different initiatives. It's also how we face the challenge of our cities, because you have 8% of Brazilian population that lives in Amazonia lives in cities. So it's very important to understand, as I mentioned at the beginning, how to frame our problems after this momentum that we have today, but more than this, how to frame and to define political and economic ambition to move forward, considering the race, net zero race, and more than this, how Brazil should be back to the global scenario. My feeling is that from Paris to Glasgow, Brazil matters. Be sure that Brazilian society will be fully engaged to support not only Brazil, but to support your whole, the British government, the British role in COP26, and more than this. We are very, 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 we understand very well the role to connect things. Biodiversity, food summits, we have different players, climate change. We need to express with our political will and economic vision how developing economies can go into this crisis, move beyond, and promote a fair and inclusive development, not only in Brazil, but also in a robust international cooperation. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm open for the dialogue. And of course, that I will work hard to have Brazil back at the global climate scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Izabella, for sharing your thoughts on what to expect from COP26 on this society's perspective, if I may say. We have a few questions here, and now I would like to open our Q&A section. And please, Izabella, John, Ambassador, feel free to make questions among yourselves. I think this would be interesting to see this kind of dialogue as well, not only coming from our audience. I would say that Carolina raised an interesting question that we were discussing before this event. What might be the role of private companies, given that we are in the context in the environment of this British Chamber of Commerce and Industry? What is the main role of private companies in this international summit, COP26? John Murton, could you please comment on this topic, please?
Thank you. I will do my very best. So one of the things that we noticed that's changed, certainly since Copenhagen in 2010 and also since Paris in 2015, has been a bit of a flip. In Copenhagen, it was government saying to companies and to the private sector, we need to tackle climate change. And there was a lot of resistance from the private sector. And now increasingly, we see the leading companies of the world encouraging governments to go faster and encouraging governments to be more ambitious in the targets that they set, and to say that we can go faster than we thought. And this momentum is developing all the time. And I mentioned that now 40% of global assets under management are part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and committed to fostering their portfolios to achieve net zero by 2050. And you're seeing companies come out with hugely ambitious targets. So the UK a couple of years ago set a phase-out date for the sale of internal combustion engines. In the UK, we wouldn't be able to sell new internal combustion engine cars by 2040. Recently we brought it forward to 2030. And it's been very interesting to see just how accepting of that industry has been. And actually giving companies clear targets and clarity about the changes they need to make helps them make their investment decisions. And you've seen General Motors, for example, switch from less than a year ago being part of an alliance that campaigned against tighter vehicle emission standards in the US to making a commitment just a few weeks ago that they would phase out the manufacture and sale of internal combustion engines globally by 2035, because actually industry understands that once you commit to these shifts, you have to move, and you move as fast as you can to maintain your competitive advantage. Now, Izabella brought out a really important point, which is I'm not advocating, although I think it's now a huge economic opportunity for firms, I'm not advocating some sort of capitalism that leaves everyone behind. But actually, what we're seeing with a lot of the technology of the low carbon economy is that it's very scalable and it's very deployable even in the poorest communities. And that's an exciting new development. And I look back my previous job, I was our ambassador in the DRC, which is, you know, a country with forest reserves second only to Brazil, but one of the poorest countries of the world, and the remote rural areas are incredibly poor. But what you see is the technology now of the low carbon revolution can enable those communities to leapfrog. So there are communities in DRC that have never been connected to an electricity grid, and the electricity grid, to be honest, will never be built out to those communities. But they can suddenly access electricity through things like rooftop solar, because photovoltaics are so very scalable. And through rooftop solar, they're able to obtain refrigeration or access to radio and telecommunications. And they're able to enjoy a lot of the services of the modern economy in a way that's far more accessible, but also low carbon than traditional fossil fuel generation and transmission lines and so on. So if we do this right, we can help this new technology not only to tackle emissions growth and to prevent emissions growth from communities in rural parts of the Amazon or the Congo who have never sort of been part of the modern economy in delivering emissions, not only limit emissions growth, but also to foster development and help those communities to catch up and benefit economically. And the example I'd point you to is mobile phones. You know, when I was doing my research in rural Africa 25 years ago, you had to wait 7-8 years for a landline. And then the mobile phone revolution came along, and within 20 years, there were more phones than people in a country like Kenya. And that was made possible not by governments, although some of the legislation and regulation would have been governments, but actually it wasn't governments investing in telecommunications, it was private firms. And so we need to make sure that as governments, we're setting the frameworks that enable companies that, you know, that include your members to see it in their economic interest to invest in low carbon sectors and drive the low carbon economy, not only reducing emissions, but creating jobs and growth and employment in rural areas.
Thank you. I have a question. Maybe both could could answer. It seems to be a consensus among you that finance is a key instrument. Brazil seems to be making a clear case that its main role would be to provide an environment to foster nature-based solutions, which is science-based solutions. For finance to accomplish its objectives, governance, transparency, participation, and science are crucial. My question is the government delivering a positive and credible message regarding governance, participation, and transparency, and science-based solutions, so we can achieve good financing in order to establish and implement nature-based solutions in Brazil? Maybe Izabella.
For me?
Yes, please.
Oh God, this is a thought question, but let's see. I think that's not enough what we have today in Brazil, and no, in my opinion. But we need to understand when you mention government, I understand that you mentioned the federal government, okay, because it's the focal point. But when you go into the subnational players, for example, the state governors, in Amazon region, they are looking for to have a green economic recovery plan, consider what we have today, how they reframe the problems, and this is a science-oriented plan. So we need to understand, and also when you go into the other regions of Brazil to discuss with the governors, the Alliance of Governors for Climate in Brazil, you have science-oriented as part of the strategy, as you mentioned, to have the engagement with society, civil society, and also participation. Unfortunately, the federal government do not have the political rooms that we had in the past to bring societies closer and to have an open dialogue. Okay, this is a reality. This is a political guideline from the Bolsonaro government that they blocked the political spaces or political rooms that we have in the past in Brazil to dialogue to different trends, consider not only environmental concerns, the social concerns, the indigenous and traditional people concerns, the human rights concerns, the democracy concerns. So it's very important to understand the lacks or the gaps that we have today. When we have the political intention, this is a good sign, I fully agree, but indeed how we need to readdress some internal issues in Brazil to make clear that Brazil should or could play an important role for investment, for example, carbon market investment in Brazil. The quality of our carbon, if I can use the expression, John, if you allow me, okay? Also, it's not only because we have our forests we protect, etc., but we need to understand our responsibility in climate security, the global climate security, and indeed, how we'll make it clear for Brazilian society and for the international community. And this means leadership. And leadership demands not only vision, but demands credibility. And credibility depends what? That people comes together. The trade-offs are important, but okay, you know why you are looking forward to have this leadership. And today it's not clear, it's partially. We need to protect Amazonia. I do agree. We need to restore Amazonia, but in our NDC, the first NDC, it was clear the intention to Brazil becomes a carbon sink. Okay, in the future. This was the strategic vision. The update last year cut this, remove this, okay, without any arguments. In my opinion, you don't want this, what you want. Tell me for us at Brazilian society and for international community. So my feeling is that Brazil, today, it's like a puzzle. You are fragmented. We need to connect the right things, the right directions with the right people. If you allow me, please, it's not a joke, but we need to bring another guys into the room, okay? New climate, carbon warriors, okay? People that really understand what we're discussing. And to have, what is a contradiction, that to have peace in Brazil in different situations, in different constituencies, and that because we learn a lot in the last 30 years, consider climate challenge in Brazil since Rio 92, okay? And it's not only science, okay? We have economic players very, very absolutely engaged and very important for our national strategies. You have also civil society, you have social people that social agenda and social constituencies that are very critical. For example, how to face inequalities in our cities. Brazil is an urbanized country, considering the vulnerable society, vulnerable people, communities in our big cities like Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, and what happened with adaptation. What's happened with water access, how we can improve our natural resource management, how we can go into this different, not the green umbrella economies like circularity. This means job generation, this means raising income, this means development, this means economic growth, this means civil rights, so human rights. So indeed, in my opinion, we have this lack of credibility in some authorities that today they are speaking on behalf of Brazilian society. Not Brazilian society, not other important players, economic and political players. But unfortunately, it's not clear the intentions. It's very clear what's happened last week. We are surprised, okay, with a good sign, it's a good, Itamaraty is back, this is a good news because we have a robust diplomatic language in the president's speech. It's very important to observe this. But okay, how Brazil will arrive at Glasgow. Brazil will update, review its indices that were presented last December. It's very important to reveal this, to make clear how we'll do the things, to bring people together, to dialogues, not only to have public hearings, okay, to dialogue. It's to it's to sit at the same table, to understand the different visions, to looking forward to conciliate different visions, to understand the trade-offs, okay? It's not to make up our democracy.
John, could you share some of your thoughts on the UK being playing a key financial role on the importance of this of governance and transparency for providing resources to nature-based solutions?
I will try. So one of the things we have been doing in order to try and build confidence in this area is establish the Forest and Commodities Trade Dialogue, which is a dialogue that brings together some of the key producer nations of key agricultural commodities in the world and some of the key consumer nations of agricultural commodities. And you know, a good example is something like soy, whereas if you bring China and Europe into a room, you're responsible for something like 80% of global soy consumption, and therefore if you put it together in a room with the countries that are the key soy producers in the world, you actually can have a meaningful conversation about how to make sure that the consumption of soy in China and the EU doesn't undermine forest reserves in countries like Indonesia or Brazil. So that is one set of things we are trying to do in order to build confidence and help match up, if you like, consumer demand that their consumption does no harm in major markets with producers in producing countries. In terms of transparency and things like carbon credits and so on, there's obviously a lot of work to do. But what's very clear is that as more and more companies in Western markets see shareholder value in being seen to be at the cutting edge of the low carbon economy, and that's in their, the value of their brand. And you see that with all the sort of major firms like Apple and others, and they guard those brand values very seriously. So as more and more of those companies commit to emissions reductions, and you've seen companies like Microsoft commit to go emissions negative into the future, the market for carbon credits through avoided deforestation and so on will likely increase. But there are bodies, there are civil society groups and so on who will be policing that very carefully and making sure that those companies that are in the market to buy those credits are buying credits that are actually worth something. There's no point going and buying a credit. It would undermine your shareholder value if you were to buy a credit in pursuit of your environmental emissions reductions targets, only to be exposed by a civil society group that showed that actually the acre of forest to which your credit pertained was, a smouldering pile. So that whole sense of transparency and certifiability is going to be hugely important and demanded not just by governments, but also by private sector consumers of these credits in the advanced economies, because civil society and shareholder value will demand it.
Thank you. Carlos Peixoto, who is the head of our oil and gas committee at Britcham, is asking, what is your view on the importance of cleaner electrification in developing countries, considering that to keep growing and reducing inequalities, we will need to provide energy that is both available and sustainable, and also affordable. So if you could share some of your thoughts on this, the importance of cleaner electrifications in developing countries in the context of COP26. John, please.
Thanks. Well, as I think I've touched on, I see the expansion of access to energy and to electricity in particular as completely consistent with the shift to renewables, and that's not just because it has the right environmental impact, but if you go to all the leading research organizations like Bloomberg New Energy Research and others are very clear that already in 70% of the world, renewables are the cheapest form of available generation, and that within the next 3 or 4 years that will be virtually the entire world. And also within just 3 or 4 years in many countries in the world, it will be cheaper to invest in new renewables than to run some existing fossil fuel technology, even if that fossil fuel, if you inherit a coal-fired power station from your uncle and you have it all paid off, just the cost of bringing in the fuel, running the power station, taking away the waste will be more than the cost of investing in new solar. So the cost curves are clear, and investors are taking account of that. No one wants to be left with a stranded asset on their hands, and you're seeing a big movement from sovereign wealth funds and pension funds in the West moving away from fossil fuels because they recognize the potential for certainly coal to be a stranded asset, and often oil and gas to be a stranded asset in the very near future, moving those investments into new sectors like renewables. And as I mentioned, because renewables are so scalable and because they don't depend on a grid, they are often far easier to deploy into rural areas than traditional technology. And to give you an idea of how competitive they can be now, in the United Arab Emirates, they're laying on solar power for 1.6 cents US cents per kilowatt hour. Now, the cost of transmission in the state of Pennsylvania is 1.7 cents per kilowatt hour. So what we're learning now is that even in the world today, it's cheaper to put out new renewables than it is to send electricity down a wire in many advanced economies. So the economics of it are really clear. The International Energy Agency has said solar is the cheapest form of electricity we've ever had, and I expect that solar revolution to continue. And it's the variability question, the dispatchability question, which I think is being driven at, is going to be resolved. Is resolved by interconnectors. In the UK, we've been running our grid at 80% zero carbon in recent weeks. And also the cost of battery storage has come down enormously. It's come down about 85% in the last decade, and it's set to come down by a similar amount over the coming decade. So you're already seeing grid scale batteries in the UK, 200 megawatt batteries being ordered and put onto the grid. And then, of course, all the way down to sort of smaller solutions for mini grids in villages and so on. So I think the combination of renewables and battery storage will be a very powerful combination for poor and hard to reach communities.
Thank you. Francisco Itzaina is making this question. Long road from intentions, words to action amid the world dichotomy between democracies and autocracies. Myopic short-term private goals and long-term state targets is made by geopolitics and lack of serious, firm, long-term goals. I think he's making a point that how can we effectively solve this the making of long-term goals without serious effective results, and how can we solve this issue by 2030 and establish more effective goals until 2030. Could you share some of your thoughts on this long-term and abstract goals and the need to provide short-term goals? Maybe Izabella, please.
I try, but this is a good question, and this is a thesis on geopolitical issues and the new multilateral order, international order. But I think that as at the beginning, and also as Mr. Burton mentioned, considering the importance of international cooperation, we need to face that to consider global crisis. And climate change is one of them. We are not prepared to consider the international institutions and also the international governance to tackle. And COVID is a good example. What is happening today, not only nationally, but what's happened last year, it was impressive. Okay, and the answers, you have good answers, but not enough to host the challenges or to host the impact of COVID crisis. And that's why at the beginning, I mentioned that after we have 2022, you have post-COP26 and post-COVID crisis, or still in the COVID crisis, and how the world will frame the problems. And it's not only Brazil. And of course, and considering a carbon-oriented economy. So these global externalities will also we need to understand global externality, and also will impact what we will need to discuss, global public goods. It's very important. It's a new way to see the things or to try to manage the things in innovative political or geopolitical approaches. And in my perspective, we need to reduce these disparities around the world that COVID exacerbated. Consider social inequalities and democracy, human rights. Democracy is part of this. The climate crisis, we have different scenarios, different studies that mention this, will push new migration flows, for example. okay? And we need to understand how we'll manage this internationally. And in my perspectives, in my personal perspective, I think that it's very important that you can have this new momentum of the international order and globalization, that probably we need a new, how can I say this, we need to organize a new coalition of democracy around the world. We need to understand what's happening. Sometimes it's difficult for other countries to understand, but even in European countries or UK after Brexit, and also United States with Mr. Biden election, you have the social movements on the floor, and they host this. They host inequality and they host democracy, and it's very important for political parties or at the international order to have a better understanding the challenge of democracy in this new center. We are going into climate change age, and we are going into the digital age. How citizenship will be expressed in this new context? This is important questions because, again, COVID crisis is a sample and make clear the challenge that we have today. So I think that we need to understand the new and how to manage citizenship in this new context, and democracy, how we need to, I don't know if it's the right word, but to reshape or to understand how we'll bring democracy in this context. It's a big challenge for international order and for, in my opinion, especially for developing economies. But what happened, I don't like to comment national realities because I don't know about national realities of the country. But yesterday I heard about the political crisis in France, and this is very expressive, what is happening, and how we can go into civil rights. And France is a cradle of democracy. So it's very important to pay attention, consider this age, climate change age, and plus digital age, how citizenship will be expressed. It's very important.
Thank you, Izabella. John, Oscar of Graça Porto Advogados is raising a question on climate litigation. This has been a trend in the past 5 years. The number of lawsuits on climate change is just growing. As a diplomat, how do you see this litigious environment on climate change?
Thanks. Gosh, that's a difficult question. I'm not really an expert in this sphere. So I hesitate to venture a view, to be honest. My instincts tell me that actually we're not going to litigate our way out of the climate crisis. We'll cooperate our way out. Perhaps if I sort of just come back and add something on the last question, the connection between long-term goals and how we operationalize them in the near term. One of the things that we've done in the UK, and I'm sure Peter and the climate team and the British Embassy will now be keen to work through with the federal government in Brazil, is our experience of establishing a climate change committee, an independent committee that gives the government scientific advice, independent advice on how to meet our net zero, how to meet our climate goals, and how to meet our net zero target. And they give us advice on what the level of our carbon budgets should be for every 5-year period between now and 2050. And the latest advice they've given us is that for the period between 2033 and 2037, we should have reduced our emissions by 78% on 1990 levels, which is an astonishingly ambitious target, and essentially represents bringing forward 15 years what was our target until a couple of years ago. So we have that independent committee on climate change. It has bipartisan support from the left and the right of the spectrum. And one of the things that I think is encouraging about what President Bolsonaro has announced is that, it means both sides of the political spectrum in Brazil are now committed to these ambitious targets, and it helps take some of the sting out of the political debate in the UK, and I think that's really helpful. The other thing I'd point to in terms of is obviously I'm an optimist on these issues, and yes, sometimes take-ups of things like renewable energies or zero-emission vehicles or even mobile phones as they were can be slow at first. But if you remember with mobile phones, you know, when I was younger, I was too poor to have a mobile phone. No one had a mobile phone. No one had a mobile phone. Then one of my friends had one, and then everyone had one. And it moved really quickly. And I think you'll see the same with a lot of this technology, that actually it works sort of that you get the early movers come in and pick up the technology, and it becomes commercial, it becomes scalable, and then it picks up really quickly. And so take the example I just cited earlier. Last year, over 90% of new electricity generation additions around the world were in solar and wind. And in Australia, incidentally, the figure was 99%. And Australia's federal government is not, has not yet set any sort of federal level climate change targets in that sense. So although the share of generation in the world of renewables is still relatively small, if over 90% of the capacity additions every year, and that number is increasing every year, are coming on stream as renewables, you can see that very quickly, don't confuse stock and flow. As if you get that 90% figure coming in, year out, then suddenly that percentage of global generation capacity that is accounted for by renewables will grow very quickly indeed.
Thank you. I think we have our last question before our closing remarks. Fábio Caldas, head of the Britcham Power and Renewable Committee. John, what is the UK government's view on CCUS, the carbon capture, usage and storage technology, and its impact on the low carbon transition?
Thanks. Well, it's a good question, and it's probably a good one to end on. One of the things that the UK government has done in its net zero target is it's a net zero target, and that's an open acknowledgement of the fact that we will still emit greenhouse gases in 2050, but the quantity we emit will be balanced by the quantity that gets put into sinks, be that sort of new forests that we're committed to planting in the UK, or storage through carbon capture, utilization and storage, or even direct air capture. And we've put aside, I think it's £500 million in the last budget for direct air capture research in the UK. So CCUS is going to be part of the economy. We know that there are some sectors that are going to be hard to abate. We think electrifying the energy grid, we can see how we're going to do it. Zero emission vehicles, that's relatively easy to see how we will do that. There are challenges in scaling, but we can see how it will be done. We're beginning to see now sort of trial plants of zero carbon steel manufacture, and you can see how that will ultimately be possible. There are some sectors that remain difficult, like cement. We're not quite, that will be sort of one of the more difficult sectors. So it's clear that there will be a need for CCUS. But CCUS only really works if you've got an effective carbon price to incentivize it. But it's going to be part of the solution. It's one of those areas where we'll have to work internationally, because if you are going to make use of CCUS, you have to be able to demonstrate that actually it's effective and that the carbon you put underground stays underground. Otherwise, of course, its utility is questionable. So it's something that we will be doing. And it's going to be an important part of the net zero solutions, I imagine, for many of the economies that have taken on a net zero target.
Thank you very much. So maybe, Izabella, some final thoughts about what we talked today, maybe sharing your view on what is the role of climate diplomacy in Brazil?
Brazil used to have I used to say that one of the best climate diplomacy in the world, as also as one of the best climate science in the world. And I hope that with the new institutional arrangements that we have today in Itamaraty, and also the new minister, as Mr. Murton and also the ambassador mentioned before, and you saw this in Mr. President Biden's summit, that it will become not only a good news, but a new good process on our diplomacy. And for this, we need to recognize that we have really good ones, diplomats in Itamaraty, not in our tradition, but today. And I hope that the minister can have really political space to manage this agenda. In the past, we have this alliance between Minister of Environment and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also, sorry, not between, among, with Minister of Economy, Minister of Agriculture, and all of the key guys or the key agenda that should be closer and together to go into climate negotiations and also climate process. And you have the leadership of Itamaraty. Okay, not only on climate, if you go into the Nagoya Protocol concerning biodiversity and also Rio+20 conference, so we work closer together, and how robust Itamaraty is in our diplomacy is. My feeling is that the guys are there, if I can use the expression, they're alive. And I hope that they can play an important role in these negotiations until Glasgow, this negotiation process. But I'd like to suggest, be open to Brazilian society. In my personal opinion, it's not clear why Brazil diplomatically express positions like corresponding adjustments is not something that we want to have as a priority in our negotiation and our interest of negotiation in COP26. It doesn't make sense for me because this is an opportunity for Brazil. Okay, and if you need some additional requirements, institutional ones, you can understand better, requalifying, John, what transition means for a country like Brazil. And indeed, as I mentioned before, we don't need to go into loopholes of the Article 6. We need to know what you want and how you can use international rules and then how we can have this convergence process. And diplomacy in Brazil knows a lot how to do this. Okay, and how we can also play as a bridge to connect other countries and also to connect other agendas. We need to understand the role of biodiversity post-2020 framework that will emerge from COP15 and how this will connect with climate change ambition in our interest, for example, in carbon market. Because if you want to preserve the forest and you have a carbon-free asset, we need to understand the role of carbon sink. What are the strategies? And indeed, what's the role of the markets, the private market to allow Brazil to achieve this ambition? We need also, in my opinion, to remove the prejudice of carbon tools, the market tools that we have today in Brazil. My feeling is that sometimes we have a resistance to understand better or to have the leapfrog to bring market into the room with shared responsibility as Paris Agreement established. So of course that we have our NDCs, we cannot, that's why I mentioned we need to update based on this new political intention that President Bolsonaro made clear last week. But we have the mitigation ambition, what are the strategies for Brazil to do this? And we have additional ambition, if I can use the expression, consider market tools, for example, Article 6.4, and indeed how Brazil wants to bring carbon market, even non-compulsory, voluntary carbon markets into our carbon mitigation scenarios. So Itamaraty, as I mentioned before, knows how to do this. Okay, you have people in civil society and private sector in Brazil and also in subnational players. And I think that the central bank and some also in Minister of Economy have people that knows a lot, agriculture, infrastructure, they know how to do this. What we need is to bring things together, and to bring things together, in my opinion today, this is imperative to have Itamaraty back. The climate diplomats Brazilian climate diplomats must be back, not to block negotiations, but to approve and to bring clear rules that make sense for all the countries around the world. We need a fair, low carbon trajectory. And Brazil, it's important to make it an asset, or together with the British government to make it an asset for COP26.
Thank you, Izabella. Great final message. John, if you could say some final words so we can close our webinar, please.
Thanks. Well, gosh, I had to sum up. I mean, I suppose my final words to a community of business audience is especially one with UK ties is for those of you who, and I know travel has been difficult the last couple, last year and a half. For those of you who've not been to the UK recently, don't underestimate just how committed the whole of UK government is to reducing emissions in the UK. Don't underestimate how quickly the technology is moving and how swift markets are responding to this. And just go and look at the share price of Danish renewable firm Ørsted and compare it to BP over the last 15 years, and you'll see how markets are pricing in this new future, and seize the opportunities that the low carbon economy presents in Brazil, in the UK, and more widely afield. And with the changes that we've made recently to things like our export credit regime, the UK government is very much able to support you with low carbon investments in Brazil and in the wider region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think our time has gone. I'd like to thank once again our speakers and our audience. I was delighted to have you with us today in our first webinar of this series of webinars that we will dedicate throughout this year on COP26. So thank you very much to our speakers, to our audience, and I wish you all have a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.